the US ranks among the top countries where rivers are constantly struggling and degrading. Dams are a big reason why, causing floodplains to turn into something far from their original form. And there's erosion, less vegetation on river banks, and a loss of both water and near-water biodiversity. But you know what's worse? Fires can make things even worse, wiping out whatever life is still hanging on near rivers. However, in Washington state, they figured out how to bring rivers back to life even after wildfires. Biologists just went ahead and released some beavers there, and soon the scorched land started showing signs that hadn't been seen in years. So, are beavers saving Washington? Sounds bold and even a bit weird, but it kind of looks that way. Let's see how it all works. The Mississippi works. What river comes to mind first when we talk about the degradation of U.S. waterways? Of course, it's the country's main artery, the river tied in one way or another to 40% of all land in the continental U.S., the Mississippi, with its endless web of tributaries. That's where we'll start our video. You can get a sense of just how much people affect the river by looking at the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. It shows up for most of the summer off the coast of Louisiana and is basically a buildup of nitrates and phosphorus that flow into the Mississippi from farming, industry, and everything else that creates waste. But that's not all, because active human activity in the Mississippi River basin also leads to the loss of real biodiversity hotspots, floodplain forests, and wetlands. Floodplain forests are safe spots to rest and a food source for hundreds of kinds of birds, insects, fish, and other animals. I mean, it's a forest like any other. But here, it's also, let's say, a tricky kind of forest that can get flooded by the Mississippi itself or one of its tributaries. So, in forests like these, you might find even more species. From those that are far from endangered to those that people go out of their way to protect. For example, the floodplain forests in the upper Mississippi area are home to 180 species of birds during nesting and migration. That's a pretty solid number, and we're only talking about feathered creatures here. If you count all species, the number shoots into the thousands. But since the 1800s, people have been actively developing both the upper and lower Mississippi regions. When it comes to the upper part, it's lost nearly half of its floodplain forest cover from back then up to now. Here's a typical scene you might come across these days. Trees that have turned into deadwood because of changing conditions. This photo's from Reno Bottoms, a wildlife refuge not far from the Minnesota-Iowa border. In the lower Mississippi, where all kinds of species live, only 30% of the land is forest, according to a 2020 study. Sounds good. Overall, it's better than in some other places. But that's only if you don't count the fact that the valley used to be completely covered in forest. What's both incredible and kind of tragic is that because of human influence, the reduction of floodplain forest has caused the Mississippi and its tributaries to be a flood machine. Almost every year, some part of the river gets hit, bringing huge losses to both the environment and humans. Washington State. Now, we're heading over to Washington State. It's probably not the kind of place you think of when it comes to river degradation or the fading of biodiversity due to human actions. Nature looks pristine. The waterways seem close to perfect, but that's just the way it looks. Because in fact, human influence has affected the ecosystems of the state's waterways, too. According to the Center for American Progress, or CAP, more than 46% of all rivers in Washington have been altered. And if you break the rivers down by size, 68% of all large rivers have been changed, along with 42% of smaller streams and rivers. A couple more figures. In Washington, 10% of rivers don't flow freely because of barriers like 751 large dams. And 44% of rivers run through land that's been heavily developed or modified by human activity. According to estimates, before European settlers actively developed the waterways of Washington, coastal areas like floodplain forests and wetlands covered 40 to 50% of the landscape. Then came the era of excessive livestock grazing along rivers and streams, agricultural development, intense resource extraction, and deforestation. All of this led to a decline in stream complexity, as well as the degradation and loss of habitat quality and abundance along waterways. Now, floodplain forests and wetlands make up only 2% of the area around the river. Fire. When everything's already bad, something comes along that makes it even worse. Fires. In 2015, a fire broke out on the Twist River, a tributary of the Metho, and then spread over an area of 11,100 acres. Judging by the reports from the scene, nature really suffered. A fire is something that wipes out everything with even the slightest trace of life. So, the Twist River and its surrounding area lost a large portion of its biodiversity. And that's saying something considering things were already pretty grim there. So, you could say the land around the river went through a double degradation. You know what really helped restore a completely ruined land? What can help bring water roots back to their original state even after double degradation from human activity and fire? Surprisingly, but it's those who gnaw on trees, literally reducing their number, beavers. It's worth mentioning right away that beavers were once very common here. On the Twist, the Metho, and on other rivers, you could find hundreds, even thousands of these animals. However, then European colonizers arrived, and in their rush to make money, they hunted every toothy engineer they could get their hands on. The result, there were almost no beavers left in Washington. In 2007, the Metho Beaver Project was launched, which focuses on restoring the population of beavers once wiped out on the Metho River. After the 2015 fire, 3 pairs of beavers were released into the streams of Black Canyon through which the Metho River flows. Later, after a certain period, the researchers came back and found that all the beavers had successfully survived the winter and even built 1 or 2 dams. After that, it was discovered that there were already 7 or more dams on each observed site. Beavers. You could say that the land restoration project's going just great. Beavers are building their dams to create ponds where they can hide from predators. And for land restoration, this is the perfect setting. This is how it works. The dam blocks the river, which creates a pond in front of it. You could say that thanks to the dam, the water overflows. What does that mean? Floodplain forests and wetlands get the water they lost due to human activity a long time ago. When it comes to the conditions after the fires, beavers are like a booster shot for nature that needs to recover. Because the wetlands and floodplain forest created by these animals are a magnet for a huge number of different species. So after a while, the researchers arrived at the area that had been recently burned. They saw dams with a series of large, deep ponds behind them, and around them was land covered in marsh and shoreline plants, including aspen shoots. On top of that, it was obvious that the restored landscape was on the verge of attracting deer, elk, whitey, and many other animals since they love coming to wetlands. Sadly for the beavers, they're slow and chubby creatures, and they make a fine meal for coyotes, pumas, and bears. This also increases biodiversity, though not in the most pleasant way for nature's chief engineers. Beaver ponds. It also turned out that only a few beavers are capable of restoring a certain area, even after it's been completely destroyed by fire. In general, scientists were clearly not wrong when they called beavers a keystone species. The benefits they bring are enormous, and it doesn't end with land restoration. What do you think about the idea that beavers can in principle save an area from fires and even from droughts, which the whole world including the US is currently so worried about? Since 2008, as part of a project in partnership between the U.S. Forest Service, the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, and the salmon recovery funding around the Eastern Cascades, more than 300 beavers have been released in the upper tributaries of the Metho. As the project participants claim, 1 beaver dam can create a pond that holds 1 million gallons of water. Now, imagine how many of these ponds 300 beavers could create. Well, no need to imagine. The project area is thoroughly studied by its participants. It's been found that the released beavers created 176 ponds. Not every pond is the same size. Some are bigger, others smaller. Water storage. However, biologists surveyed 62 beaver aid ponds as part of the project and concluded that they hold nearly 5 million gallons of water. To put that in perspective, these ponds would be enough to supply an average household in the town of Twist with drinking water for 5 years. Doesn't sound that impressive? Well, the same biologist calculated that each year all the dams created by the beavers in the project collect 65 million gallons of water. That's enough to serve a typical household in Twist for 24 years. There's another study called Beaver Pond Storage where water storage was measured in 12 beaver complexes around 29 ponds in the Columbia River Basin. It turned out that each of these ponds also stores water underground and in large amounts, 6.6 million gallons. How could this all help fight droughts that got people so worried? It's like regular human-made dams. The ponds created by beavers store water that people can use for drinking when river flow drops. Besides that, the natural water storage system made by beavers slowly releases cold, clean water downstream during hot summers. In comparison, water bodies that beavers haven't restored often dry up and don't provide any water at all. Fire protection. How can beavers help fight fires like the one on the Twist River in 2015? Well, they just create ponds. As obvious as it may seem, water doesn't usually catch fire, so a pond is kind of a fire shield. The fire just can't get through a beaver dam. This was confirmed by the Methyl Beaver Project since the fire-affected areas where beavers had planted before 2015, the fire reached the ponds they created. After visiting the project area post-fire, researchers saw many ponds with only one side of them being scorched. On the other side, the plants weren't harmed by the fire. The beaver-built reservoir also serves as a water source for firefighters. Actually, the researchers from the Methyl Beaver Project proudly claimed that one of the ponds was specifically used for this purpose. Beaver ponds also trap sediment, reduce the impact of mud flows, and act as water buffers, protecting against floods. It seems like beavers deserve more recognition because these natural builders are versatile saviors able to return the waterway to its original much healthier state. And just when you think the benefits of beavers are all covered, here comes salmon. Yes, beavers help with this, too. Salmon's a fish with a complicated life. It's born in fresh water, grows in streams, then moves downstream to spend time in the river mouths, where it gets big enough to survive in the ocean. After a rich life in the ocean with plenty of food, salmon starts its complex return journey to the freshwater ponds in the upper reaches of the rivers where it spawns and then dies. Washington State is a paradise for 7 kinds of salmon. It has everything they need to thrive. Tons of little streams, access to the ocean, and more. Salmon habitat. But the population of Washington grew by 63% between 1990 and 2020 and is expected to top 9 million by 2040. That's like adding another Seattle to the state over the next 20 years. As the population keeps growing, more land and water are needed for living, working, and leisure. And that's already leading to the loss of salmon habitats with more damage on the horizon. For example, there's Puget Sound. Over time, it lost its role as salmon habitat along a third of its massive shoreline that's over 2,500 m long. Why? Reinforcements, including dams and other structures, were built to protect homes and other infrastructure. All this protection changes the habitat of salmon and forage fish. The reinforcement stops waves from eroding the bluffs, creating beaches where salmon find insects and other fish to eat. Floodplains, as we've already said, also suffer heavily from human impact. For example, some reports say that 50 to 90% of land along waterways in Washington's been lost or significantly altered by people. These are areas full of lush vegetation that shade and keep the water cool, filter out dirty water, support trees with roots that help hold the banks together, and provide shelter for fish. Basically, floodplains are a safe haven and a food source for young salmon. So, changing or wiping them out completely becomes a real challenge for this precious fish. Of course, fixing all that takes a full-on complex approach, and that's exactly what the state's doing now. Actively working to restore and protect salmon habitats. Beavers can help with that, too. In Washington State, there's a project called Tulliet Beaver. And since 2014, over 200 beavers have been released as part of it. The main goal of this project was to boost the declining salmon population. The beavers built dozens of ponds, which turned out to be perfect spots for young salmon to live and grow because the water's cold, just right for this fish. Plus, ponds mean tons of plants that give shade and loads of insects that become food. Basically, a pond's an ideal temporary home for a fish with a rough journey. This project didn't measure how much the fish numbers went up after the beavers moved in. According to the team, they simply don't have the resources for that. So biologists are measuring things that are easier to gather. Water temperature plus the number and size of new ponds. For the people involved, the key indicator is a better habitat, since a better habitat equals more salmon. If that doesn't quite convince someone, biologists go on. We've seen sites just completely transformed to these massive beaver complexes of like 12, 13 dams and ponds everywhere. Now those ponds are full of hundreds of baby salmon. Saving the beavers. By the way, all these beaver reintroduction projects not only help reverse river degradation, but also create habitats for lots of species like salmon. They also save the beavers themselves, because they've only got two options. Either get killed or live peacefully as part of some project. The thing is, beavers still aren't really seen as useful animals in most places. They gnaw on trees, build their own irrigation systems. Farmers, let's just say, aren't thrilled about that kind of behavior. So, the chief engineers of the natural world often just get killed. Thanks to projects like Mthal Beaver, things are different now. And instead of grabbing a weapon, any Washington local could just give the organization a call, wait for the team to arrive, and then watch as the troublemakers get carted off somewhere into the woods. All the beavers who are now actively fixing up ruined rivers are actually the same troublemakers who got picked up. Among this team of wild builders, for instance, there's a curious male who got arrested for damaging apple trees. There's also a red-haired female who was caught taking down poplars. Reforming them as part of some project is of course impossible. Beavers will always love to chew on trees. However, steering that urge in the right useful direction, that's the perfect outcome both for the beavers themselves and for us humans.